Tisztelettel köszöntöm Önöket. Megtisztelő, hogy itt lehetek. Okay, that's it. I am presenting on behalf of a joint production. I was thinking it's a little bit like John and Paul away and they left Ringo to talk with you. But Dr. Szűts Zoltán and Beke Ottó were also involved in this, forming this presentation. The first few slides, I have to accept my apologies. I have used technology to translate some of my English words for you for Hungarian, but it's a framing of what I want to get into with regards to my presentation. So please forgive some of this Hungarian when I'm talking in English. And I asked my wife if she would have a quick look at it, and she said, So forgive me. But the framing of our argument really is that the creativity of generative language models is not an act of creation from scratch, but it is a recombination, a combinatorial rearrangement of existing linguistic, cultural, and stylistic patterns. And this mode of operation is closer to paraphrase, the poetics of paraphrase, collage, or remix, than to creative invention as we would maybe traditionally understand that. So the linguistic products of AI, artificial intelligence, are often coherent, logical, and even surprisingly witty, but the results are based on statistical probabilities of human text, not an original inspiration. So these unique features of the texts generated by such tools as ChatGPT, they adapt well to different contexts and tones and styles. And the flexibility of this is a key element of their efficiency, their communicative efficiency. AI is able to recognize and adapt language structures that fit different discourses, making that speech more human-like. Thanks to this phenomenon, machine language use becomes human-like. And the impact of this is particularly noticeable where AI acts directly with human dialogue partners, such as customer service, education, creative writing. So the other last little bit of framing is that the human-faced AI, therefore, not only allows machine communication to take on human forms, but it also gives humans a new medium for reflection on themselves. The language that AI uses always refers back to the human source from which it originates, and it thus acts as a new mirror. The mechanical reorganization of our human language use, thinking, and style that offers feedback that is both aesthetic and philosophical in nature. So the combination of this human-like communicative efficiency and creative constraint sheds new light on the role of AI, not only in language use, but in culture as a whole. AI does not replace, but restructures the functioning of human creativity. And in parallel, it raises new questions regarding the concepts of creation, originality, and interpretation. So, moving a little bit closer to the work that I'm particularly interested in. When this AI came about in 2022, obviously I was similar to all of us. It was something new. and something quite exciting, certainly something interesting. And as I'm a teacher, an educator, and have been for quite a few years, and I've been doing my PhD about learning, I was obviously interested to see what this was all about. So this presentation, I focus on what I think is an extremely important aspect of using AI as a tool for creative practice within the field of education and combining that with learning science. And I've been guided in this work. What has helped me is a paper that came out by Mollick and Mollick, Ethan Mollick and his wife, in 2023. And this paper presented 7 different uses of generative AI for learning and for getting practiced with learning. And in one section of it, he uses the term AI as a simulator, where they present a theoretical background for why practice is such a vital component of improving creativity and ultimately performance, and with a clear focus on practical applications using AI in the learning environment. So, creativity is a very difficult concept, as we've known through history. And where does it reside, and what does it mean? Well, obviously Descartes, as we all know, came up with a nice framing of the idea of thinking, cogito ergo sum. And at the moment, I want to sort of focus on the idea that we think creatively. In March 2025, Harvard Business Review published a report about global use of AI. How are people using AI? And here's their top 10. And what was most interesting for me, and in terms of us having a look at creative thought, was that number 1, and quite overwhelmingly, number 1, popular use cases, so this is across the population, was using AI for generating ideas. So I want you to just kind of keep that in mind, because I think that's a fascinating number 1 for it to be. 8 and 9 were also interesting for me, enhancing and personalizing learning. So, the idea of thought and where thought resides is a big interest of mine in terms of education and learning. And Merlin Donald, we were lucky enough to invite Merlin Donald to an academic lab last week online. And he came up with the really helpful idea of our external memory field. And Merlin Donald's work looked at cognitive evolution from our beginnings to today. And the cognitive breakthrough that he described revolved around this external memory field. And this external memory field is the space just in front of your eyes. Traditionally, that would not involve a computer. It might involve a book, or it might involve your notes, or it might involve a picture, but it's your external memory field. And it is your working memory. It is your visuospatial sketchpad. And consequently, with a far greater capacity that allows you to think far more deeply about things. With the invention of the computer, this has transformed our ability to think. And with the invention of AI, it takes it exponentially further. So Merlin Donald has a really interesting paper about art and cognition. And he clearly says that art is a technology-driven aspect of cognition. Art is driven by technology. Think back to the first paintings, first arts, you had to have technology to put something on a wall, and it's evolved ever since. Although it may have begun as a natural expression of our collective need to represent reality, the media of artistic expression affect what can be represented, and these media differ tremendously between societies. So the effect of technology on art is far-reaching. Technology affects the kinds of cognitive networks artists can construct, in part by setting limits on the kinds of ideas and images that can be represented and created. Thinking about AI and that last section, I think, is important. So Ethan Mollick is a professor of AI, I would say, at the Wharton School in the US. And his latest book is titled Co-Intelligence, Living and Working with AI. And the work that he has been doing is really about how do we create this co-intelligence? How do we work with this co-intelligence? So this was the paper that he wrote. Now, what was fascinating in 2023 is that actually this paper was used by OpenAI, ChatGPT, OpenAI, as their example of how AI can be used for education. So he delves into several aspects, and here I've chosen one just to focus on, that it has the potential to help students practice hard-to-practice skills in new situations. And one way to challenge students to think in new ways is to prompt the AI system to build a role-playing scenario, focusing on a specific concept or a series of concepts, pushing students to problem solve and make a consequential decision, and giving the students feedback about their performance. Now, I thought that was extremely interesting in terms of how are we working with AI, but I sort of have a bit of skepticism about all of this stuff, because words are just words sometimes. They might sound good. But he based his paper on some really important learning science. And there's a little bit of a trend going on in the English-speaking world to start flipping that and calling this the science of learning. And one of the key figures in the, inverted commas, science of learning in the America, UK, Australia, as a quite a popular advance in this field, is Daniel Willingham. Daniel Willingham is a cognitive psychologist from University of Virginia in the States, and he's been writing over the last 10, 15 years, really, about cognition and thought. And about 10 years ago, he wrote this book, Why Don't Students Like School? Which is a great title. And he delved into this problem. And really, the problem is that students don't really like school because the mind is not designed for thinking. So we send the kids to school for 8 hours a day and basically get them to do something that the mind is not designed to do, which is kind of crazy. So while students may be adept at explaining a concept or solving a problem within a specific context, applying the concept actively in a novel situation requires a level of automation that students have to think on their feet as they apply what they know in a new way. And that isn't easy. Now another great book, and this is a book based on a great book, is by Bjork and Bjork, and it's about desirable difficulties. And Mollick based his OpenAI paper on this research as well. And this is a book that is about using desirable difficulties in teaching. But the thing about desirable difficulties that Bjork and Bjork researched is that by practicing something that is difficult, it activates hard thinking, the kind of thinking we want students to do, as students are pushed out of their comfort zone and are asked to apply theory to practice, a desirable difficulty. And Mollick also bases his AI paper on someone who I just think is fantastic and no longer with us, but Anders Ericsson. And he wrote, this book was co-wrote with Robert Poole, but it's based on Anders Ericsson's research into expert performance. This is the kind of popular book based on the science, but it's kind of for general release, called Peak. And it's about the science of expertise. How do we get expert at something? And role-playing turns out to be something that is extremely important. Role-playing is an effective way to challenge students to think about the skills they have learnt, and it can serve as a form of deliberate practice or activity aimed at improving their current level of performance, coupled with feedback. So we create a learning loop with feedback as the final piece of the puzzle. Now, feedback is essential. If we don't get feedback, we don't know what we're doing. And Dylan William is probably the lead researcher from UCL in London into feedback. And in a great book, Embedding Formative Assessment, he says, without formative assessment, the whole thing falls apart. If you don't tell someone how they're doing, they're never going to know how they're doing. So, in terms of a feedback loop, before they practice, students need to have a knowledge base, and then practice should push students to demonstrate a multi-layered understanding of that topic. The goal is to apply what they have learned to a new situation through that interaction. So there's the kind of whole scientific learning science basis of Mollick's paper, which he goes on to do. And this paper was written for teachers, written for educators, which he goes on to give an example, generic prompt of how you could do that. And this idea is to practice the knowledge of a concept, a creative concept or a concept. And it gives the AI a role, and it gives the student a role, and the goal is to practice that given situation, asks the AI to create a scenario in which I can practice, and I should have to encounter certain problems. You should give me dilemmas or problems during that scenario. After 4 interactions, set up a consequential choice for me to make, then wrap up by telling me how I performed in that specific scenario and what I can do better next time. Do not play my role, only play the other role that you've prompted to give, and tell the AI, wait for me to respond. Well, in the field of creativity, it could look something like this as the prompt, specifically for art. I want to practice my knowledge of Impressionism. You'll play the role of an expert in Impressionist painting techniques, and I will play a novice art student. You could give it the level of education where you might be there. The goal is to practice planning a landscape for a painting, create a scenario in which I can practice applying my skill, I should have to encounter problems of location, perspective, technique, and make a consequential decision. Give me dilemmas or problems during the scenario. After 4 interactions, set up a consequential choice for me to make, then wrap up by telling me how I performed and what I can do better next time. Do not tell me how to play my role, only play the other role and wait for me to respond. Now, that is an example of how you can take a generic prompt and put it into a specific prompt for a creative task. And what I want to sort of show, or what I want you to see, is that you could do that for any creative task. You can just change these things and do that. So that's the concept behind Mollick's prompting for creativity and using AI. I just want to finish by saying that there are some important things that I think we have to think about with our AI use for this. Which AI do we use is important. I've heard you talking about this today, but the AI tools are changing, and it's important that we look at that. What do the institutional rules say about use of AI? So students that I'm talking to at university are worried about using it because they're not sure if they can use it, and students at school are not able to use it if they're not able to have the technology, so there are issues with that. And finally, Mollick's recommendation to get better at using AI in these aspects is individual practice, 10 hours, try it yourself. It takes away that whole idea of having to training courses. It's about individual practice. One AI tool that I think is going to revolutionize learning and education is Google's LearnLM. It is based on the learning science that I've kind of shown you through Mollick's paper. It is now still at the kind of case study stage. It's not generically available as on the Gemini package, but it will be, and this is, I think, the thing to look out for. But I would like to sort of just put in a couple of notes of caution or thought. We have been working with our machines creatively for a long time, and with our computers for a relatively short time. And David Hockney, who's a wonderful British artist, moved from painting analog paintings in the 80s and 90s. He moved to doing digital artwork, and he's got a great section of his website where this is his work on the iPad. So this is his iPad painting, and great example of humans working with machines. However, I'd like to finish with just a human piece of art. And this is a student's work here at the university, at the 3rd year in the graphic arts department, Sabo Reka, and this is one of her original wood prints that she did, using a different form of technology to create her own art, which I think is something that we do have to keep at the heart of what the creative process really is. So, köszönöm szépen, meg is tényleg figyelmüket.